All right, let's move over to basketball. A lot of basketball news. Lots of basketball news. Kel'el Ware is in the portal. He was the number 8 overall prospect in the class of 2022, 5-star out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and he leaves Oregon into the portal, not to the NBA, but to the transfer portal with a lot of untapped potential. Now, Kel'el Ware is the second highest rated recruit of all time. Number 1 was Bol Bol. So it does beg a question. That question in your mind that I'm going to answer later. I will say in Bol Bol, he was at least highly productive before he got hurt and then decided to not play again and, or come back for another year rather, and then went to the NBA. Kel'el Ware, you saw the potential. It was immense. It is immense. If he goes to the right spot, maximizes his skill set, refines his offensive game, he could average 18, 11, and 3 blocks at the college level. He absolutely could. But the question here after Ware just never really found his footing offensively, he was decently efficient with his 2-point shots, not at N'Faly Dante's level, but that's not to be expected as a true freshman. But a lot of times he'd put up turnaround fadeaways and they were way off. He made some every now and then. He had a good feel for, when to roll to the basket or dive to the basket and get a lob. He had a lot of lob dunks. His athleticism is ridiculous. His 3-point shot is unrefined. He was under 30% this year. That's part of the reason Oregon really struggled to shoot the ball. Is Kel'el Ware, who going into the year, I was hoping would be Oregon's starting stretch 4 alongside N'Faly Dante, ended up being moved into a reserve role and had a stretch. I think he had some coaches' DNPs throughout the course of the year where he just didn't play because Dana Altman didn't think it was in the team's best interest, and he was working on some stuff at practice, I guess. And look, he was always raw coming out of high school. I talked about it at the time that I felt like there was going to be an adjustment period for him where at the start of the year, he might average 6 points and 4 rebounds a game. But then you look and you say, wow, over the last 20, he's averaging like 17, 7, and a couple blocks. I don't remember what numbers I used, but that's kind of how it looked. Because in Little Rock, Arkansas, man, he was playing against kids that were tiny. Like they just couldn't match up to him at all. And I think he did look a little overmatched in that sense at the start. He got much better. His defense improved. Here's the thing with him over the course of this season. His defense improved from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. At the start, he looked lost at times. He wasn't there in rotations. He wasn't making much of an impact. He was basically out there to be a tall body, catch a lob every now and then, shoot an open 3 that he usually didn't make. But then at the end of the year, when N'Faly Dante went out or was out with an injury, and it was Kel'el Ware on the floor, I felt we got the same defensive presence in there. His arms are long. He can jump. He is a fairly intuitive shot blocker. I liked what I saw from him defensively. Still had some room to grow on, rotations and situational awareness, but overall, I thought made real strides on that front. But offensively, he was the same. He has soft hands, but for whatever reason, when he'd get one-on-one post touches, I don't have data because I don't know that it exists on what his conversion rate was on one-on-one post-up situations, but that's not where he scored a majority or even close to a majority of his points this year. That's what still needed work. But when he'd comfortably put up a hard fall away, you thought, okay, if he can develop that, he can become a 20-point-a-game scorer. He's got that sort of potential, but it just never materialized there. And this is now another highly rated, top 10, top 20 recruit that Dana Altman brought in that didn't work out. And the question that some of you may have already asked yourself that I'm now going to get to, I'll save you the trouble of dropping in the YouTube comments or hitting me up on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at LockedOnDucks, mentions and DMs wide open, and say, should Dana Altman and his staff just not go after those sorts of guys? Because there is an ever-growing list of highly recruited, highly sought after, high ceiling, 5-star basketball recruits that just don't work out in college. And some of them even go to work out in the NBA. I mean, Troy Brown has had a better NBA career at this point than I ever thought he would. He was not much of a shooter at Oregon. He wasn't much of a scorer. I mean, he was a decent scorer, but not a great one. Like, I felt like, his lone season at Oregon as a one and done came and went, and it was really underwhelming. And he's not the only one, right? The 5-star recruits that Oregon basketball has brought in program history go as follows, in order. Bol was averaging like 21-9 and then got hurt. Kel'el Ware, we didn't even see, I think, 50% of his full potential. Troy Brown, just talked about him, and Folly Dante, whose career has been marred by injuries, but when he's played has been really, really good. Can't shoot more than 5 feet from the basket, but when he's on the floor, he looks the part and plays the part. Jabari Brown, who way back in the day didn't play with the Ducks. I think he only played in a couple games, actually, and then he went to Missouri and he thrived. Lewis King, who was a starter on that 2019 Sweet 16 team the Ducks had, led by Peyton Pritchard. But Lou King was underwhelming. He was a solid player, but he wasn't almost ready for the NBA, 5-star sort of guy, lighting the world on fire. He was just like he was a knockdown shooter, essentially. And there are more too. 2 more, actually. CJ Walker, who showed a lot of athletic potential, never had an offensive game. Just never really worked out. And now Nate Biddle, who at the end of this year really showed some promise, really showed some potential. And the question of whether or not Dana should continue to go after these guys, look, maybe it's just coincidence that the guys he's brought in have not worked out the way we hoped they would. Dante has, I think Biddle has that potential. If he plays like this next year, man, he could be, his ceiling is immense. Bol, you ask what if with the injury, right? But I wouldn't necessarily avoid going after these sorts of guys, because I think what we're seeing in college basketball from a recruiting standpoint is the hit rate is even lower than it is in football. And we see in football a lot of guys come in with a lot of potential. Ty Thompson, for instance, big 5-star quarterback recruit. He hasn't started a game, and he won't, barring an injury to Bo Nix, going into year 3. So you have to, I think, just take these ratings, these star ratings sometimes with a grain of salt, because, as crazy as it may seem, not all 5 stars are created equal. They're just not. There was a defensive lineman, I always forget his name. It's hard to remember, that Oregon had committed a long time ago, and he didn't end up working out. He ended up transferring to UCF. But even a guy like that, or like Mateo Uiagalelei, for instance, right? And he got dropped down to a high 4-star, whatever. But even when he was a 5, him against Kayvon Thibodeau, 2 different entities. And even coming out of high school, that was made very clear, right? Thibodeau's number 1 overall player, and he certainly looked like it. But I don't think for Dana Altman, the solution here is, well, just go after, 3-star guys and develop them all, and, just don't get guys who look like they have a lot of potential. Because when you look at the next slew of highly rated recruits Oregon's brought in over the years, these were all like really high 4, bordering on 5-star players. You had Tyler Dorsey. Yeah, that worked out. Got us an Elite 8 and Final 4 in back-to-back seasons, right? Big part of that. So was Dylan Brooks. Same thing. They were very similarly rated. Frank Kepnong transferred out, but was looking like a pretty good player. Addison Patterson, that didn't really work out. Will Richardson, I know not everybody, but a lot of people like to hate on him. He's been a very good player for Oregon. Dominic Artis, he was a good player. Francis Okoro, he was not as impactful. That one didn't work. Peyton Pritchard was a high 4-star recruit. Oklahoma was going after him. Dylan Brooks, Miles Norris, and then Isaac Johnson, Jalen Terry, right? So when you go through all those names, those are like the 15 or 20 highest rated recruits of the Dana Altman era or so, however many names I put in there, right? The hit rate is low. But when they hit, when Dylan Brooks reaches his full potential, when Peyton Pritchard reaches his full potential, the ceiling there is higher than it is with other guys. So I think that really you just kind of have to accept that the hit rate may not be as high. But we've got 2 more coming in this year, right? And KJ Evans and Mookie Cook. Cook was in the dunk contest the other day. I actually didn't see any highlights of that, at least not as I've recorded this, but I'll probably start listening afterwards, or start watching them afterwards. But I don't think that you want to just stop going after that caliber of player altogether. But I think, as a coaching staff, Dana Altman and company, they do need to get better about developing them. Because Troy Brown, came in a little bit raw, didn't develop as much, and that team missed the NCAA tournament, went to the NIT. Kel'el Ware came in very raw. They weren't able to carve out a role. They weren't able to develop his offensive game. And maybe it got better in practice, but it certainly didn't get better in the game. We saw that. He was not a good three-point shooter all season long, and he's supposed to be. So I think there's just an element of give and take there, and there's an element of risk, and there's an element of randomness with these guys. And I do think at some level, looking at a program like Gonzaga, if you can become a little bit more like Gonzaga, I think that would do Oregon really well. Now, what do I mean by that is finding guys who do have a lot of potential. And I want to find a couple guys' star ratings real quick, but find guys who have a lot of potential, but that do need some time to develop. But being able to develop them, Drew Timme, for instance, amazing career, right? He's a high 4-star recruit, and as a freshman, he didn't play as much. But then he developed, and he continued to develop, and he got better and better and better. That's the element that is missing, right? And I wanted to look up Julian Strawther as well, because I really like Julian Strawther's game. Yeah, and he's a high 4-star recruit as well. So I think when you look at the difference between what Mark Few has been doing at Gonzaga, which is 9 straight Sweet 16 appearances, probably would have been 10 had the 2020 season not been canceled. And what's going wrong with Oregon here, or what has gone wrong with some of these highly sought after recruits, is the development just hasn't quite been there. That's the missing piece. And can Dana Altman do that? Yeah, of course he can. Look at what Peyton Pritchard was, right? And some of it comes down to the kid himself, because Peyton Pritchard came in as a highly sought after recruit. He started or played a lot as a true freshman on that Final Four team. He was like the number 5 option. I mean, it was Dylan Brooks, it was Tyler Dorsey, it was Dylan Ennis, the Villanova transfer, Chris Boucher, and Jordan Bell didn't do much on offense, but Pritchard was in there, right? Like, he's 4th or 5th option at best offensively. And then by the time he left, he was dominating games. He was our go-to number 1 player. So that's what has to come next. Is Dana Altman needs to find the guys who have that sort of potential, but maybe don't have their eyes so dead set on the NBA, or who aren't just a half step away from being ready to go to the NBA, because you want to bring in the best players you can. And most of the time, not all the time, as we know, most of the time it's going to come from guys who are highly sought after recruits, but something just has to click there. And frankly, it can be hard to put your thumb on what exactly that is and what exactly Dana Altman and his staff need to do to get better at that going forward. But I don't think they should just stop going after these guys altogether, because I look at Mookie Cook and I look at KJ Evans and say, boy, there's a lot of potential there, especially with Cook. And I wouldn't want to bring in a guy who's, if he's being rated as a 3-star recruit, it's probably because he might need longer to hit his ceiling, or he might need more development. He might be missing an entire element of his game to, really reach his full potential. And that can take longer to develop, or it might not get as high. But, I think something has just got to click between Dana Altman and the kids that he's bringing in and their development. I've seen him do it before, so I'm inclined to think he can do it again, but with the number of misses that there have been, whether it's Kel'el Ware or Troy Brown or Jabari Brown, like just keep going down the list there. I think we just kind of have to accept, given the data we've been given, that the hit rate for that, when they'll truly morph into superstars, when they get into their college career, it's just not as high as we'd like it to be. Appreciate everyone listening. If you got any questions, drop them below. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.